Today I'm answering your toughest questions about the Nephilim. Cartoonicus asks if the Nephilim came back or survived the flood, doesn't that mean God failed? And then he says, and could the Nephilim just be a term for big, impressive warriors rather than actually supernatural hybrids? So I paraphrased his question a little bit, but this was really good. A lot of people are wondering about this. I think Cartoonicus is saying he believes the first batch of Nephilim before the flood did have a supernatural origin, but he struggles with whether or not the giants after the flood were actually supernatural warriors or not. And so I think that's cool. I think he's someone who's trying to take the text seriously. He's not trying to dismiss this issue. I do personally tend to lean towards the view that the giants after the flood had a similar supernatural origin as well, and here's why. The family tree of the Nephilim described in the Bible is so detailed, including the lineage of the giants after the flood. So I have an entire video about the post-flood giants in the Bible on this channel, and it tracks all of their name changes. And it just gets really, really complicated. So I wonder if this is just an analogy, to make us think these warriors were tall and scary. Why would the family tree be so detailed? Like, why not just call the post-flood giants? Why not just call all of them Nephilim? Goliath, for instance. We know that he's from Gath. He's an Anakim. The Anakim are descendants of the Nephilim. Well, why not just straight up call Goliath a Nephilim? Then they were called the Amorites, and then there's this splinter group over here. And it took me hours and hours to trace it all. And I just don't think it would be that complex if it were just a symbol. So that's where I stand, but I know there's people from all over different perspectives on this channel. That's cool. We're all just wrestling with it together, trying to figure this out. It could be some complex way of trying to trace evil and its influence from like parents and the way it's passed down through civilizations. Yeah, it could be something like that. Like, in the back of my mind, I leave the door open for that. It doesn't matter to me what it is and if it's easy for me to grasp or not. What matters is that I understand what the writer was trying to say. So we're all just trying to figure out what he meant when he wrote this. So we've got a lineage that seems a little too complicated to be symbolic. And then we've got stuff like the measurement for King Og's bed. Now, the dimensions, it's 13 and a half feet long. It actually matches the dimensions of the ritual beds in Babylon, where people would invite deities to participate in their, how do we say this, hanky-panky festivals. So the writer is trying to draw a connection to the supernatural origin of the post-flood giants. All of this stuff put together makes me think, okay, this was probably meant literally. When the analogies get this complicated, he's probably not just trying to be symbolic here. I feel your pain when you're trying to reconcile this because I found it hard to come to terms with myself. I think the fact that Egypt saw giants about the same size as Goliath, that does at least tell us that these guys were not just beings that were exaggerated, because that would mean that the Israelites and the Egyptians just happened to exaggerate them to be the same size. So there's something to be said about their height here. Either they had an awesome diet, or they discovered Wheaties like way early, or something else is going on. So if the giants came back, why doesn't that undermine God's plan to send the flood? In my opinion, there is a way to explain how the flood was successful for what God was trying to do, even if some of the giants survived or came back after the flood. So I kind of think about it this way. One of my professors, Michael Heiser, he said that, God's goal wasn't necessarily to destroy every single Nephilim. It was probably just to eliminate the threat of them. So if he takes out the majority of them and then says to humans, hey, you guys had some responsibility in corruption before the flood, because you participated when the angels tempted you and taught you these destructive things, this forbidden knowledge. So you guys should have some responsibility in cleaning up the mess, right? So he sends humans in, as Heiser would say, to to mop up the remaining giants. And that makes a lot of sense to me. It makes sense to me that if we had responsibility there, that we would have to play a role in the solution. So I guess part of it is dependent on how you define success. Was God's goal to preserve the human race, which is the way I look at it, and preserve possibly the bloodline of Jesus if you're looking at this as a genetic thing and the angels attempting to stop Jesus from being born? Because in hindsight, if the goal was to save the human race and save Jesus's lineage, it worked. But if the goal was to wipe out every single Nephilim, then, well, by that definition, it maybe didn't work. But I think it all depends on how you're looking at it. So I think there's a way to look at it where the flood was still a success, even if some of the giants lived through it or came back afterwards. LW216316 has a question about Noah's DNA, specifically about the teaching that Noah was chosen because he had genetically pure human DNA, not contaminated by the Nephilim. Is that actually what the Bible says? Yeah, that's a good question. Now, they do have an answer for this. I decided to pause here and comment on a couple things. So there is a verse that says Noah was perfect, and this has been interpreted by some as meaning that Noah had perfect DNA. It's Genesis 6:9, and the King James Version says, Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. So out of that translation, people started to teach that Noah had perfect DNA. But the Hebrew word for perfect is actually tamim. It means sound, complete, man of integrity. It's not actually a biological term. It's more of a moral term. So somehow that King James translation led to some confusion here. But I also don't think Noah had Nephilim DNA either, although that is a very popular interpretation. It's from Enoch and Genesis Apocryphon. And both of those books actually clarify that Noah is not a Nephilim, but that rumor still persists. I believe in First Enoch, they actually go find Enoch and ask him whether or not Noah is a Nephilim, because he is described, Noah, as looking like an albino, and his dad, Lamech, was afraid that his wife had actually had an affair with an angel. So it gets real interesting, but ultimately both of these books answer this question as no, he's just a pale human. Enoch goes to talk to the angels to find out the answer, and they tell him no, Noah is not the child of an angel. The extra biblical books people are looking at actually refute that for us, but I guess people just don't finish reading those stories. So I don't know. They probably heard it from the rumor mill somewhere and haven't actually read Enoch themselves. So I guess we still arrive at the same place. Noah's DNA is not contaminated by hybrid DNA. But why do I bring up the King James mistranslation? Well, I think some people see that word perfect and they think that Noah was like sinless, and I know you're not saying that, so it's good that you catch that. So LW216316 then asks another question or makes a comment. Many people question why a loving God would kill the whole world except Noah and his family. There were children, pregnant females, grandparents, all were killed in the flood. God was justified in doing it because they were not human. This is really interesting. They're making the point that, like, the flood was there to target the Nephilim, right? That is the point that Enoch makes. And I think it's both to take out the Nephilim and to deal with human corruption. And part of that, in Enoch, they're going to stress that that was actually caused by the angels teaching knowledge that would corrupt us. So whether or not you buy into that part of the story, the Enoch version or not, humans became really violent according to Genesis, and there appears to be some spiritual influence because of Genesis 6:1-4. How could a loving God send a flood to destroy the whole world? So that is a really good question, and I've tried to come up with an analogy to explain how God could send a flood and still be a loving God. So maybe this will help you explain this to someone or help you in the way that you're processing this, because it is kind of tough to reconcile. So imagine that you are in like an apocalyptic future and the world has been as violent as it was at the flood. So Genesis says that like people only thought about evil all the time, all day long, right? That is probably worse, more violent than anything that we've ever seen in our lifetime. So you do have to imagine a society that's on the brink of eliminating itself. They're probably going to go extinct because they're going to kill each other. So that frames the discussion as God trying to preserve the human race from extinction. So that's part of the context. Imagine you're in this underground bunker. You're in the same type of situation. And you've got about 8 people down there who you think would be good candidates to repopulate the planet. Like the only 8 people who have never participated in the violence that's going on outside of the bunker. So you're underground and up on the surface, like humanity is just like slaughtering each other, right? Now imagine that you've got some kind of button you can press that would just vaporize everything on the earth except you and the people in your bunker, right? So you have a reset button, which is what I think the flood was. That was a way to reset the human race, reset the planet to make sure we can start over new and humans can survive. Now you have to imagine that you've got to make the decision of when to press the button and if to press the button. But in order to like put yourself in God's shoes and accurately make the decision that he had, you have to imagine you have some way to know like what the outcome of the flood is going to be and what happens if you don't press the button. So I know how people feel about AI sometimes, but like just imagine, I had to invent something to simulate God being omnipotent, right? Having omniscience, like knowing the entire timeline and every possibility. So he knows what needs to be done and what will happen when there's no hope. He knows exactly when there is no hope left for the human race unless he intervenes. We have no way of knowing that because we can't see the future and we're clouded by emotions, right? So, I don't know, in life, in a relationship or a situation at work, I might think that a situation is hopeless. A human being cannot tell when there really is hope because they can be blinded from the fact that there's still hope. We can't tell if there's still hope or if there's not hope anymore. But God can, since he can see the whole timeline, right? So you have to imagine like you've got some kind of like AI program or software that can go around and scan the planet and come back and tell you that if you don't press this button, there's going to be 0% that the human race survives. Somehow, to put yourself in God's shoes, you just have to assume that we have knowledge that humans will never have. So we cannot truly make this decision. But God knows when to pull the plug and reset, right? So if you are in the bunker and you know for sure that if you don't press the reset button and vaporize the surface, that humans are going to go extinct. When the violent mob upstairs, up above the earth, when they start to break into your underground bunker, you know you're going to die. If you die, you know it's the end of the human race. Do you press the button? Like, it's a really hard thing to simulate because I don't think a human is ever going to have the knowledge to be able to do that. So you can't truly simulate it, but is there a point when, to save the human race, you would do it? Because if you don't, everyone is going to go extinct, right? I think that's the situation that God is in, and he waits until there's only a handful of people left because I think he's trying to respect our free will and let us make our own choice. Because if he acts too early, if he sends the flood too much earlier, maybe he kills a bunch of innocent people, but also he takes away our choice. So in my mind, that is why he waits so long to send the flood, So the commenter here, I don't think they're necessarily wrestling with that. I think they understand like God had to act. But I think that's really good to think about, because a lot of people, I mean, they just struggle with their relationship with God because of the flood story. I've met people in that boat. So finding a good way to help make them understand there might be a time where a reset was actually necessary. Not that a human can ever make that call, but for God, if you see all the outcomes and see the full timeline, He would know there could be a scenario where that is the only way to save the human race. This is still a really tough question, so I hope that was helpful. If it was, let me know. If it wasn't, let me know, and maybe together we can come up with some better way to help people through this question of, like, how can God be loving and still wipe out the entire planet except for 8 people? Well, thank you guys for your comments and questions. And if you want to see more Q&As, like if you like this thing, I'll do it more often. But just let me know in the comments, or if you just want me to get back to my regular like cinematic storytelling videos. I am still going to do those as my bread and butter here on this channel. But yeah, let me know if you want any more Q&As. And if you haven't seen the Witch of Endor video, you should check that out. In the Hebrew, it actually reads like the witch summoned more than just Samuel. So maybe some other being was there that she didn't expect. So check this video out next.